Mark Thompson was a decorated military officer, respected by his peers and devoted to his country. He was stationed overseas for most of the year, but he always made time for his wife, Emily, who worked as a nurse at the local hospital. They had been married for 8 years, and Mark always thought they had a rock-solid marriage. But one day, everything changed. It started with a phone call late one night. Mark was still on deployment, trying to wrap up the final tasks of the day when Emily called, her voice trembling. "Are you cheating on me?" she demanded without any greeting. Mark was stunned. He had never given her any reason to doubt him, and he was taken aback by the sudden accusation. "No, of course not," Mark replied, struggling to keep his voice calm despite the long day and the shock of the question. "Where is this coming from?" Emily didn't answer right away, and when she did, her words were frantic and filled with suspicion. "You've been distant, Mark. You hardly call, and when you do, you're always rushed. I know something is going on. I found some messages on your laptop. Don't lie to me." Mark was bewildered. He had no idea what she was talking about, and he tried to explain that his busy schedule left him exhausted and short on time. But Emily wasn't having it. The call ended with Emily hanging up abruptly, leaving Mark staring at his phone in disbelief. Mark returned home a few weeks later, eager to clear the air and get to the bottom of Emily's accusations. But when he walked through the door, Emily's demeanor was cold and unwelcoming. She had moved his belongings into the guest room, and the tension in the air was palpable. He tried to talk to her, but Emily was guarded, unwilling to listen to anything Mark had to say. She showed him screenshots of messages she claimed to have found on his laptop, flirtatious exchanges with another woman that Mark had never seen before. He swore he had no idea how they got there, but Emily refused to believe him. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's accusations only grew more intense. She told her friends, her family, even their neighbors, that Mark was a cheater. Mark was frustrated and confused. He loved Emily, but he couldn't understand why she was so convinced of his infidelity. Mark's military career was demanding, and he knew that his time away put a strain on their relationship. But this was different. Emily wasn't just upset. She was out for blood. Determined to prove his innocence, Mark took his laptop to an IT specialist, hoping to find evidence that would clear his name. The technician confirmed his worst fears. His laptop had been tampered with. Someone had installed spyware, capturing his keystrokes and sending fake messages. But who would do such a thing? Mark's mind raced with possibilities, but none of them made sense. He couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's sudden distrust was rooted in something more than just insecurity. When he confronted her with the technician's findings, Emily dismissed it, calling it a desperate attempt to cover his tracks. Emily grew increasingly paranoid. She started tracking Mark's phone, showing up unannounced when he went out with friends, and even confronting one of his female colleagues in public, accusing her of being the other woman. Mark was mortified and exhausted. He had no idea what had gotten into Emily, and every conversation felt like walking on eggshells. Mark decided it was time to take a break. He packed a bag and went to stay with a friend from the military, hoping that some space might help them both clear their heads. But Emily wasn't having it. She filed a report with his commanding officer, accusing him of misconduct. Mark's spotless record was suddenly under scrutiny, and his career was in jeopardy. Then, one night, Mark received an anonymous tip through social media. A message from a burner account with no profile picture simply read, "You're being set up. Your wife is hiding something." It was cryptic, but it gave Mark a sliver of hope. He started digging into Emily's background, looking for anything that might explain her sudden change in behavior. What he found left him reeling. Bank statements showed frequent cash withdrawals that he couldn't account for, and Emily's phone records revealed dozens of calls to a number Mark didn't recognize. Mark hired a private investigator to follow Emily, hoping to uncover the truth. The PI returned with shocking evidence. Emily had been meeting with a man named Victor, someone Mark had never heard of. The two of them were seen together at restaurants, parks, and even at their own home when Mark was away. It was clear that Emily was hiding a double life. Confronting Emily with the evidence, Mark expected a tearful confession or an apology. Instead, Emily exploded in anger, denying everything and accusing Mark of trying to frame her. She doubled down on her claims that Mark was the one cheating, even as the truth stared her in the face. Mark was at his breaking point. The woman he loved was lying to him, gaslighting him, and actively trying to destroy his career. He couldn't believe that the person he thought he knew so well could turn on him like this. The betrayal cut deep, but he knew what he had to do. Mark filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Emily was furious, accusing him of abandoning her and refusing to accept any responsibility for her actions. She played the victim to anyone who would listen, painting Mark as a cold-hearted soldier who didn't care about his wife. The divorce process was messy and contentious. Emily fought for everything: the house, the savings, even Mark's military pension. She spread rumors about him, claiming that he was abusive and unfaithful, hoping to sway the courts in her favor. But Mark had the private investigator's evidence and the IT specialist report on his side. During one of the hearings, Mark's lawyer presented the evidence of Emily's infidelity and her attempts to sabotage Mark's career. The judge was not impressed with Emily's theatrics, and the tide began to turn in Mark's favor. Still, Emily wouldn't back down. She was determined to make the divorce as painful as possible. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, Mark received a surprising visitor: Victor, the man Emily had been seeing. Victor, looking worn and nervous, asked to speak with Mark privately. Hesitant but curious, Mark agreed to meet him at a quiet coffee shop outside of town. Victor confessed that he and Emily had been involved for over a year, but things weren't as straightforward as they seemed. He claimed that Emily had manipulated him too, feeding him lies about Mark's supposed infidelities and portraying herself as a victim of an unloving marriage. Victor was unaware of the full extent of Emily's deception until recently, when he started noticing inconsistencies in her stories. "I think she's using both of us," Victor admitted, his voice tinged with regret. He handed Mark a USB drive, saying it contained recordings and messages that Emily had sent him, some of which suggested she was planning something even more sinister. "I don't know what her endgame is, but you deserve to know." Mark took the USB drive, unsure of what to expect but hoping it would finally provide some clarity. Victor's revelations made Mark realize that Emily's actions were not just the result of a failing marriage. They were part of a larger, calculated scheme. Mark spent the next few nights poring over the contents of the USB drive. What he found was beyond anything he could have imagined. Emily had been meticulously crafting her narrative for months, planting evidence and fabricating stories to frame Mark as the villain. In one of the recordings, she discussed plans to use Mark's military status against him, threatening to ruin his reputation and take him for everything he was worth. There were also messages where Emily hinted at financial problems and her desperation to maintain a certain lifestyle, suggesting that her accusations were part of a broader attempt to secure a financial safety net through the divorce. As Mark listened, a disturbing pattern emerged. Emily was willing to destroy anyone who stood in the way of her goals, including Mark. The woman he thought he knew had been playing a long game, and he had been her unwitting pawn. Armed with this new evidence, Mark prepared to confront Emily once more, but this time, he was ready for anything. Mark invited Emily to meet him at their house, claiming he wanted to discuss a potential settlement to make the divorce smoother. Emily arrived, her demeanor confident and smug, expecting Mark to finally cave to her demands. But Mark had other plans. He played the recordings from the USB drive, watching as Emily's expression shifted from anger to shock. For the first time, Emily was at a loss for words. She stammered, trying to deny everything, but the evidence was irrefutable. Mark confronted her about Victor, her lies, and her attempts to ruin his career. Emily's composure shattered, and she lashed out, accusing Mark of turning everyone against her. "You always had to be the hero, didn't you?" she screamed. "You couldn't stand the thought of me being happy without you." Mark calmly told her that it was over, and that he had everything he needed to ensure she wouldn't get away with her schemes. Emily stormed out, but Mark knew this was far from the end. With the new evidence in hand, Mark's lawyer pushed forward aggressively in the divorce proceedings. Emily's claims were discredited, and the court began to see through her facade. The judge ruled in favor of Mark, granting him the majority of their assets and rejecting Emily's attempts to claim his military pension. Emily, however, was not one to go down quietly. She filed multiple appeals, dragging the process out even further and costing Mark more time and money. But the courts were not swayed by her repeated attempts to play the victim, and each ruling came down in Mark's favor. Emily's credibility was in tatters, but she continued to fight, refusing to accept defeat. The stress of the ongoing legal battle began to take its toll on Mark, but he was determined to see it through to the end. Mark's patience was wearing thin. The legal battles, the constant accusations, and Emily's relentless pursuit of vengeance were draining him. He began experiencing anxiety and sleepless nights, haunted by the betrayal and the never-ending drama. He considered settling just to make it all stop, but his lawyer and friends urged him to stay the course. Then, out of nowhere, Emily reached out with a surprising offer, a truce. She suggested they sit down one last time, just the two of them, to try and find a way to end things peacefully. Mark was wary but agreed, hoping that maybe, finally, they could put everything behind them. The meeting was tense. Emily was calm, almost too calm, as she made her proposal. She wanted a significant portion of the assets and a non-disclosure agreement to ensure that none of the details of their case ever became public. In return, she would drop all her remaining claims and let Mark go his way. It was a bold demand, but Mark sensed there was something else driving Emily's sudden change in strategy. As Mark considered her proposal, he noticed a familiar face in the background of the cafe where they were meeting, Victor. He was watching them closely, and Mark realized that Emily wasn't acting alone. Something about the scene felt off, and Mark decided to push back, refusing to sign anything without consulting his lawyer first. Emily's calm demeanor cracked. She became frantic, her tone shifting from persuasive to threatening. She warned Mark that if he didn't comply, she would make his life even more miserable. But Mark had seen enough. He walked out, determined not to let Emily manipulate him any longer. The next day, Mark received a call from Victor, who revealed that Emily had been planning to use their truce meeting as a way to blackmail Mark into compliance. She had been recording their conversation, hoping to twist his words into something she could use against him. Victor had grown tired of being her pawn and decided to warn Mark instead. With Victor's help, Mark gathered the final pieces of evidence he needed to expose Emily's full scheme. Her plot was unveiled in court, showing her pattern of deceit, manipulation, and her attempts to frame Mark. The judge was appalled, and Emily's legal standing crumbled. Emily's desperation turned to panic as she realized her carefully constructed plan had fallen apart. She lost her job at the hospital due to the scandal, her reputation in shambles. Mark, on the other hand, was finally free. The court ruled in his favor, granting him a swift and final divorce without any of Emily's demands. With the divorce finalized, Mark felt a sense of relief he hadn't experienced in months. He focused on rebuilding his life, diving back into his military career with renewed determination. The experience had changed him, but it also made him stronger, more aware of the importance of trust and honesty. Emily tried to reach out a few times, but Mark blocked her number and cut off all communication. He wasn't interested in hearing more lies or giving her any more chances to hurt him. He was done with the drama and ready to move forward. Victor moved on as well, distancing himself from the chaos Emily had created. He and Mark parted on amicable terms, both understanding that they were victims of the same manipulative force. Mark took time to reflect on everything that had happened. He realized that Emily's betrayal, while painful, was not his fault. He had been loyal, trusting, and committed to their marriage, and he refused to let her actions define his future. In the end, Mark learned the value of standing up for himself and refusing to be manipulated. He shared his story with friends and colleagues, hoping that it would serve as a warning about the dangers of unchecked trust and the importance of staying true to one's own principles. The experience had been a harrowing journey, but Mark emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever came next. For the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful about the future, free from the shadows of deceit and betrayal, and focused on living his life on his own terms.